A terrified boy pounded on the Vampire King's frozen gates, begging through the blizzard. He'd locked himself away for over a century, counting regrets instead of days. But when the child raised that silver pendant, Alaric's dead heart remembered what breaking felt like. This was his descendant, his bloodline that should have died generations ago. And the creatures draining his mother's life, he'd made every single one of them. Before we dive into the story, drop a quick comment below and let me know what draws you to vampire stories. Your engagement helps support this channel. The Northern Tower had been dark for 127 years. King Alaric preferred it that way. Counting snowflakes was easier than counting regrets. He tracked everything in his self-imposed exile, the ice crystals forming on ancient tapestries, the silence between wind gusts, the ways he destroyed everyone he'd ever tried to save. Tonight, something interrupted his count. Thud, thud, thud. A fist against frozen iron. Small, desperate, impossible. Alaric's eyes, pale blue, like winter ice given consciousness, snapped toward the gates. His fingers, which had been tracing the same groove in his throne's armrest for the past 17 years, went still. No one came here. The fortress was a legend now, a cautionary tale mothers told children in the valley below. Stay away from the frozen king's castle, or you'll be claimed by the endless winter. Thud, thud, thud. Go away, Alaric whispered to the empty hall, though 6 inches of iron and centuries of ice stood between him and whoever was foolish enough to knock. But the pounding continued, grew more frantic, more desperate, and then, carried on wind that could freeze breath in lungs, he heard it. A child's voice. King Alaric. Please. Is anyone there? Alaric's body betrayed him before his mind could intervene. He was across the great hall in heartbeats, or what would have been heartbeats if his chest still remembered that rhythm. When he reached the gates, he pressed one pale hand against metal so cold it would shatter mortal fingers. Don't open it. Send him away. You know what happens when you let the world back in. Please. The voice cracked with tears and cold. My mom, she's dying. Please, somebody help. His hand was already lifting the iron bar. The gates groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Snow and wind lashed through the opening, and beyond stood a small figure that looked more like a half-frozen ghost than a living child. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. His dark hair was crusted with ice, his thin coat soaked through and torn. His lips were blue, his cheeks red with cold that was minutes from frostbite. But it was his eyes that struck Alaric, wide and determined and absolutely unafraid, despite the tears freezing on his face. In his small hands, he clutched something. A pendant, its chain tangled around his fingers, its silver surface catching the dim light from inside the fortress. Please, sir, the boy gasped, stumbling forward into the doorway. You have to help me. They took her. The pale things with hollow eyes, they took my mom and marked her and she's dying and... He stopped. His eyes had adjusted to the darkness of the hall, and now he was seeing Alaric for the first time. Alaric knew what he looked like. Tall enough to make doorways feel small. Skin the color of fresh snow, unmarked by time or sun. Eyes that held the blue of glacial ice and the weight of more than a century of isolation. Hair black as a starless winter night, hanging loose around a face that was all sharp angles and ancient hunger. The boy took one small step backward. You're, he whispered. A monster, Alaric finished, his voice rough from decades of disuse. Yes, you should run. But the boy didn't run. Instead, his small jaw set with a defiance that had no place on someone so young and terrified. Are you going to hurt me? The question was so direct it actually startled him. Because if you're not, the boy continued, his voice steadying even as his whole body shivered, then I don't care what you look like. His breath came in visible puffs. My mom is dying. Those things, they came to our village, and they had empty eyes, and they smiled when they marked her. They said she had the old blood. His voice broke. Please. Everyone else just locked their doors. You're the only one left. Alaric should have closed his door too. Should have sent the boy back into the storm. Should have returned to his throne and his counting and his careful, quiet waiting for the world to forget him completely. But then the boy held up the pendant. She told me to bring this. She said if I ever needed help, if things got really bad, I should come here and show you this. Alaric moved faster than mortal eyes could track. He snatched the pendant from the boy's hand, and the child yelped, stumbling backward onto the snow-dusted floor. Alaric barely noticed. His entire being was focused on the small piece of silver in his palm. On the crest engraved into its surface, a wolf's head crowned in ice roses, its eyes 2 tiny sapphires. The family crest of House Valdis. His family crest. The one he'd given to his mortal daughter Isabel before he chose immortality over watching her grow old. The one he'd placed in her infant hands the night he left forever. The one he'd wept over at her grave 280 years ago. The one that was supposed to be dust and forgotten history and impossible. Where did you get this? His voice came out as a snarl, and the boy flinched. It's my mom's. She said it's been in our family forever. Since the old days. And your name? Alaric knelt down, bringing himself closer to the boy's level, though his presence still filled the space like an approaching avalanche. What's your name, child? Nelson. The boy was crying again, but he met Alaric's eyes. Nelson Valdis. The world stopped. Valdis. The name he'd abandoned. The bloodline he thought he'd watched end when his daughter died of old age while he remained unchanging, his choice irrevocable, his punishment eternal. But bloodlines didn't simply end, did they? They continued through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, thin threads of blood carrying forward across centuries. Your mother, Alaric said quietly, carefully, as if the wrong word might shatter this impossible moment. What's her name? Sarah. Sarah Valdis. Nelson wiped his nose with a frozen sleeve. Why? Do you know her? Thunder rolled across the mountains. And in its wake, Alaric heard something else. Something that made what little warmth remained in his ancient blood turn to ice. Howls. Not wolves. Worse. The hollows. His first creations. His greatest failures. The vampires he'd made trying to save his dying sister, then abandoned when their minds shattered into endless hunger. They'd found the bloodline. And they were coming. Alaric looked down at Nelson, at his great-great-great-great-grandson, shivering and terrified and so impossibly brave. Get inside, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority he hadn't used in 127 years. Now. But my mom is your mother, which makes her my blood. Alaric pulled the boy to his feet and ushered him deeper into the fortress. And I've spent 127 years hiding from my mistakes. Tonight, that ends. The howls grew closer. Nelson looked up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. You'll really help? You'll save her. Alaric closed the gates. For the first time in more than a century, his dead heart felt something like purpose. Call me grandfather, he said softly. That's what I should have been. Outside, the hollows circled the fortress, their empty eyes reflecting the storm. Inside, a vampire king remembered what it meant to have something worth protecting. And in Nelson's small, cold hand, the Valdis pendant, blessed by Alaric's long-dead wife Elena, began to glow with a faint, impossible warmth. Nelson had expected dungeons. Chains hanging from walls, maybe skeletons in corners, the kind of place monsters were supposed to live. Instead, Alaric led him into a library that seemed to have no end. Books lined shelves that stretched 3 stories high, their spines cracked with age. Moonlight filtered through windows of frosted glass, casting everything in pale blue. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in, the first warmth Nelson had felt in hours. He moved toward it automatically, his frozen fingers reaching for the heat. Sit, Alaric said, gesturing to a chair beside the fire. His voice was gentler now, though it still carried that roughness of disuse. Tell me about the attack. Everything you remember. Nelson sank into leather that probably cost more than his house. The shaking wouldn't stop, partly from cold, partly from everything else. It was 3 nights ago. They came just after dark. 5 of them, maybe 6. They moved so fast, like shadows, but their eyes. He squeezed his own eyes shut, but the image remained. Their eyes were empty, like someone had scooped out everything that made them people. The hollows, Alaric said quietly. He stood by the window, his back to the fire, his face unreadable. They didn't kill anyone. They just looked at faces, like they were searching for something. Nelson's voice dropped to a whisper. Then one of them saw my mom. It smiled, and the smile was worse than the empty eyes. It grabbed her arm and pressed its fingers into her skin. She screamed. When it let go, there were marks. Like frost burns, but they glowed. How did she escape? She didn't. It let her go. It said. Nelson's hands clenched into fists. The old blood still flows. The queen will be pleased. Then they all just left. Disappeared into the woods. Alaric's fingers tightened on the windowsill, and Nelson heard stone crack. My mom got sick right away. Fever first, then she started getting weaker. The village healer couldn't help. She keeps saying she's so cold, even next to the fire. And the marks, they're spreading. Up her arm, across her shoulder. His voice broke. She's dying, isn't she? Yes, Alaric said, and Nelson appreciated that he didn't lie. Unless we stop what they started. What are they? The hollows. Alaric turned from the window. In the firelight, he looked impossibly old and impossibly young at the same time, like something that had stopped aging, but kept accumulating years anyway. I created them, he said. Every single one. Nelson stared at him. 280 years ago, I had a sister. Seraphine. She was brilliant, kind, everything good in the world. Alaric moved to a desk covered in maps and pulled out a piece of parchment. She was also dying. A wasting sickness the physicians couldn't cure. His jaw tightened. I tried to save her. I turned her into what I was. A vampire. Immortal. Unchanging. He began to draw, quick, precise lines forming a tree with branches. But the transformation went wrong. Instead of becoming like me, she became something else. Something broken. Her mind fractured, her hunger became insatiable, but worst of all, she could create more. She bit people, and they didn't die or become vampires. They became hollows, mindless. Hungry. Empty. How many? Nelson whispered. 28 before I. Alaric's hand stilled on the parchment. Before I ran away. I couldn't fix them. Couldn't help them. So I locked myself in this fortress and pretended the world didn't exist anymore. He added more branches to the tree, names Nelson didn't recognize flowing from his pen. Then, at the top, he wrote a name Nelson did know, Isabel Valdez. My daughter. I left her when I chose immortality. She lived a full life, married, had children. The bloodline continued. His finger traced down through generations, through names and dates, until he reached the bottom and wrote, Sarah Valdez. Nelson Valdez. Your mother carries the old blood, my blood, diluted but still there. Still recognizable to those who know how to look. Alaric's voice went hard. Seraphine knows. She's been conscious inside her curse all these years, trapped and aware. And now she's found my bloodline. Why does she want my mom? Because the old blood is pure enough to complete a ritual. One that would restore her mind fully, give her back everything she lost. Alaric met Nelson's eyes. By draining your mother's life force completely. The fire crackled. Nelson felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. Can you stop her? He asked. Can you fight them? I can try. That's not good enough. Nelson stood up, surprising himself with his anger. You made them. You're the reason they exist. You're the reason my mom is dying. Yes, Alaric said simply. I am. Then fix it. If you made them, can't you unmake them? It's not that simple. Why not? You're a king, aren't you? You're powerful. You're... Nelson gestured helplessly at the vast library, at Alaric's impossible presence. You're magic. There has to be a way. Alaric was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he knelt down until he was at Nelson's height. Up close, his eyes weren't cold at all. They were sad, endlessly sad, like winter that knew spring would never come. Call me grandfather, he said softly. That's what I should have been. What I gave up the right to be when I chose this. He gestured at himself. But if you'll have me, if you'll trust me, I swear on every year I've wasted that I will save your mother. Or die trying. Nelson looked at this creature, this monster, this king who counted snowflakes to avoid counting regrets. Who'd locked himself away rather than face what he'd created. Who was looking at him now like Nelson was the most precious thing in the world. Okay, Nelson said. Grandfather. Outside, the hollows howled in the darkness. But inside, something old and frozen began, impossibly, to thaw. They left at dawn, though dawn in the frozen wastes was more concept than reality. The sky lightened from black to gray, and the wind shifted from howling to screaming. Nelson had never been this far north. Nobody from the village had. There were stories about the wastes, places where cold could crack your thoughts like ice, where things older than mountains wandered, hungry and patient. Stay close, Alaric said, pulling Nelson's head tighter. And if I tell you to close your eyes, you close them immediately. Understand? Nelson nodded, though his teeth chattered too hard for words. They moved into white nothing. Snow fell sideways, then upward, then forgot which direction it preferred and simply hung suspended in air that felt sharp enough to breathe blood. Nelson kept one hand wrapped in the edge of Alaric's cloak, terrified of losing him in the whiteout. What lives out here? He managed to ask. Things that shouldn't. Alaric's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Ice wraiths, spirits of travelers who died in the cold. They try to convince you to lie down, to rest, to sleep. Don't listen to them. As if summoned by the mention, Nelson heard it. A woman's voice, sweet and sad, singing a lullaby his mother used to sing. Close your eyes, Alaric commanded. Nelson squeezed them shut. He felt Alaric's hand on his head, pressing him against his side. The air grew colder, so cold it burned. The singing grew louder, more insistent, joined by other voices, men, children, all of them calling, beckoning, promising warmth and rest and peace. Then Alaric spoke, and his voice wasn't human anymore. It was the sound of winter itself, ancient and absolute. Words in a language Nelson didn't know rolled out like thunder, and the singing stopped. Cut off mid-note, as if something had remembered to be afraid. You can look now. Nelson opened his eyes to see shapes retreating into the storm, translucent figures made of frost and memory, fleeing from whatever they'd heard in Alaric's voice. They walked for hours. Maybe days. Time felt wrong in the wastes, stretching and compressing like something alive and malicious. Nelson's feet went numb, then his hands, then everything except the small point of warmth where his body pressed against Alaric's side. How are you doing this? He asked during a moment when the wind died enough to speak. The magic. The power. All of it. I'm old, Alaric said simply. The older a vampire becomes, the more we grow into our nature. Shadow walking, blood sense, protective wards, these are skills learned over centuries. Was it worth it? The question came out before Nelson could stop it. Becoming this? Living forever? Alaric's steps slowed. I thought so, he said quietly. For about 50 years, I thought so. I was strong, unkillable, free from death and disease and weakness. His hand tightened slightly on Nelson's shoulder. Then I watched my wife die. My daughter. My friends. Everyone I'd ever loved turned to dust while I remained. And I realized immortality wasn't a gift. It was just time. Empty, endless time to remember everything you've lost and broken. Then why not just— Nelson didn't know how to finish. Die. Alaric glanced down at him. Because I'm a coward. It's easier to hide than to face what you've done. Easier to count snowflakes than corpses. An avalanche spirit materialized to their left, a massive thing of compressed snow and rage, its roar shaking the ground. Alaric simply raised one hand, and shadows poured from his palm like liquid night. The spirit froze mid-charge, then crumbled into ordinary snow. Not today, Alaric said to it, almost gently. They found the way station as night fell, a stone structure half buried in drifts, abandoned but intact. Alaric cleared the door with one push, and they stumbled into darkness that felt warm simply by virtue of having walls. Rest, Alaric commanded, and began building a fire from wood that had waited decades for purpose. Nelson collapsed near the flames once they caught, his whole body shaking so hard he could hear his bones rattle. Alaric wrapped him in a blanket that appeared from somewhere, his cloak, maybe, or magic. Nelson was too tired to question. I'm scared, Nelson admitted to the fire. Good. You should be. What if we're too late? What if she's already— He couldn't say it. Alaric stared into the flames, his face painted in orange and shadow. What if I can't save her? He said, so quietly Nelson almost missed it. What if I fail you the way I've failed everyone else? What if this is just another mistake in a long line of— My mom says being scared means you care about getting it right, Nelson interrupted. She says brave people are scared all the time. They just don't let it stop them. Alaric looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in his ancient eyes cracked. Your mother is wise. She also says family takes care of family. Nelson's eyes were already closing, exhaustion pulling him under. That's what you're doing, right? Taking care of family. Yes, Alaric whispered. Yes, I suppose I am. Nelson didn't remember deciding to move, but suddenly his head was resting against Alaric's shoulder, and Alaric's arm was around him, careful, like he'd forgotten how to hold something breakable. The Vampire King was cold, but not the killing cold of the wastes. Just still. Like winter stone warmed by a distant sun. Grandfather. Nelson mumbled into sleep. I'm here. Don't leave. Never again. Nelson slept and didn't dream, and didn't hear Alaric's breath hitch like something between a laugh and a sob. In the morning, they found the bodies. 3 of them, frozen in the snow just beyond the way station. Villagers, by their clothes. Their faces were twisted in final terror, and on each of their foreheads, burned into frozen flesh, was a mark Nelson recognized from his nightmares. The Hollow's sigil. A crown made of thorns. They're marking the path, Alaric said, his voice empty of everything but rage. She wants me to know where to find her. She's always known I'd come. Nelson stared at the bodies and thought of his mother, and wondered how many more frozen warnings lay between them and the cathedral of eternal winter. Alaric's hand found his shoulder. Come, he said. We're close now. They left the dead behind and walked deeper into the wastes, where worse things waited. They found him in a cave carved from blue ice, huddled against the back wall like something trying to disappear into stone. At first, Nelson thought it was just another frozen corpse. Then it moved. Stay back, Alaric said, his arm shooting out to block Nelson. The figure's head snapped up, and Nelson saw eyes that were trying desperately to be human, but kept slipping into empty. The man, it was a man, Nelson could see that much, looked like he was fighting a war inside his own skin. Half his face was pale as death, veins visible like dark rivers beneath ice. The other half still held color, warmth, life. Please, the man gasped. His voice cracked between human and something else. Please, I don't want to hurt anyone. I'm trying. I'm trying so hard to. He saw Alaric fully then, and the words died. His eyes went wide. His entire body began to shake, and not from cold. You, he whispered. You're him. The first. The words came out like a prayer and a curse tangled together. You're the one who made us. Made them. Nelson felt Alaric go perfectly still beside him, the kind of stillness that came before violence or breaking. Yes, Alaric said simply. The man scrambled backward, even though there was nowhere to go. Stay away from me. Stay away. I don't want to become, I'm not one of them yet. I'm not. I'm still me. I'm still Marcus. I'm still. He's trying to help, Nelson said, stepping around Alaric's protective arm. We're looking for my mom. The Hollows took her. We're going to save her. Marcus laughed, and it was the saddest sound Nelson had ever heard. Save her? Boy, you don't save anyone from the Hollows. You just die slower or faster. That's the only choice you get. How long ago were you bitten? Alaric asked, his voice carefully neutral. 5 days. Maybe 6. Time feels. Marcus clutched his head. Wrong. Everything feels wrong. I can hear them sometimes in my head. Singing. Calling. Telling me to stop fighting and just let go. His hands were shaking. I've been holding on to my name. If I can remember my name, I'm still human. That's what I tell myself. Marcus. Marcus Thorne. Marcus. Marcus. Nelson knelt down slowly, the way his mother had taught him to approach frightened animals. What do you know about them? About where they are? Marcus's eyes focused on him with desperate clarity. 28 of them. All gathered at the Cathedral of Eternal Winter, 3 days north. The Queen Seraphine, she's building something. A ritual circle made of ice and bone. She's been gathering the old blood for weeks. Your mother, boy, she's not the first, but she's the strongest. The purest. He looked at Alaric. She's waiting for you. She's always been waiting for you. The cathedral, Alaric said. What defenses? The main approach is a kill corridor. Hollows on both sides, and they don't sleep, don't rest, don't tire. They'll sense you before you get within 100 yards. Marcus's half-empty eyes met Alaric's. But there's another way. An ice bridge over the chasm to the east. It's old, unstable, one person at a time. Maybe. I'll take it, Nelson said immediately. No. Alaric's voice was absolute. Absolutely not. You need to get inside. You said yourself. I said no. Alaric moved between Nelson and Marcus, as if that would somehow protect him from the idea. I won't risk you on a bridge that might collapse. I won't risk you at all. Nelson felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp. Would you have left Elena behind? Your wife? Would you have told her to stay safe while you went and fought alone? Alaric flinched like he'd been struck. That's different. Why? Because I'm a kid? Because I'm small. Nelson's voice rose. My mom is dying because of what you created. I've walked through the frozen wastes. I've seen the ice wraiths. I've made it this far, and you don't get to tell me to stop now. He's right, Marcus said quietly. Boy's braver than most grown men I've known. And if the queen completes her ritual. He trailed off, shuddering. You'll need every advantage. Alaric was silent for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Finally, he knelt beside Marcus. Let me see your arm. Marcus extended it hesitantly, and Nelson saw the bite mark, black and spreading, veins radiating from it like cracks in ice. Alaric drew a small blade from his belt and cut his own palm. Black blood welled up, gleaming in the dim light. He pressed it against Marcus's wound, and Marcus gasped. It won't cure you, Alaric said quietly. I'm sorry. I don't know how to undo what's been done. But this will slow it. Give you more time. Time for what? Marcus asked, but his voice was already steadier, the shaking subsiding. To hold on to your name. Marcus stared at him, then at his arm where the black veins had stopped spreading. Tears froze on his half-cold cheeks. Why? He whispered. Why would you help me? Because I should have helped all of you. Alaric's voice cracked. 280 years ago, I should have stayed. I should have found a way. Instead, I ran, and you've all paid the price for my cowardice. He looked at Nelson then, and his ancient eyes were bright with something that might have been tears if vampires could cry. I'm terrified I'll lose you both before I can make this right, he admitted. Your mother, you, Marcus, all of them. I'm terrified that I'm still the same coward who locked himself in a tower because counting snowflakes was easier than counting the people he destroyed. Nelson reached out and took his grandfather's cold hand. Then don't be that person anymore. Marcus fumbled in his coat with trembling fingers and pulled out a folded piece of leather, a map, hand-drawn, marked with symbols and notes. Safe paths, he said, offering it to Alaric. Places the hollows don't patrol. The bridge location. Everything I learned before. He gestured at himself. Before I started forgetting how to be human. Alaric took the map like it was made of glass. Thank you. Save them, Marcus said. If you can. If there's any way. Save them all. He met Nelson's eyes. And you, boy. You remind her she has a son waiting. You tell her Marcus said to fight. They left him in the cave, still clutching his name like a lifeline, still fighting the emptiness that wanted to swallow him whole. As they walked away, Nelson heard him whisper, Marcus. Marcus Thorne. Marcus. Marcus. The words faded into wind, but didn't disappear entirely. Not yet. The Cathedral of Eternal Winter rose from the ice like a scream frozen mid-sound. Nelson saw it first, cresting a ridge of compressed snow, and the sight drove all breath from his lungs. It wasn't built. It was grown ice and bone twisted together into spires that clawed at the gray sky. Ribs formed archways. Skulls grinned from alcoves. Frozen flesh merged with glacial blue in patterns that hurt to look at, as if the cathedral itself was alive and suffering and had been for a very, very long time. This is what my failure built, Alaric whispered beside him. His voice was hollow, scraped clean of everything but grief. This is my legacy written in suffering. The wind carried something then. A voice, thin and weak, but unmistakable. Nelson, baby, please. So cold. Mom. Nelson lurched forward, but Alaric's hand caught him. Wait. We do this carefully or we don't do it at all. But Nelson could hear her. Could hear his mother's voice threading through the wind, calling for him, and every instinct in his body screamed to run to her, to hell with plans or caution or... Nelson. Alaric gripped his shoulders, forcing eye contact. I know. But if we charge in without thinking, she dies. We die. Everyone dies. Do you understand? Nelson nodded, though his whole body was shaking. Not from cold this time. Alaric pulled out Marcus's map, his fingers tracing the marked paths. The bridge is here, to the east. It leads to the upper levels. You'll be above the main chamber. You can see what's happening without being seen. He met Nelson's eyes. I'll go through the front. Draw their attention. When you see your opening, you take it. What's the opening? You'll know. Alaric pressed something into Nelson's hand, the Valdis pendant, warm despite the cold. Keep this close. It's protected our bloodline for 280 years. It won't fail you now. They separated at the base of the cathedral. Nelson watched his grandfather disappear around the massive structure, moving like shadow given purpose, and then he was alone. The ice bridge was worse than he'd imagined. It stretched across a chasm so deep the bottom disappeared into darkness that felt hungry. The bridge itself was ancient ice, carved or formed centuries ago, now more cracked than solid surface. It was narrow, barely wider than his shoulders, and every step produced sounds that made his heart stop. Nelson got down on his hands and knees. Started to crawl. The ice groaned beneath him. Complained. Threatened. His hands were numb within seconds, his knees screaming from the cold that went straight through his clothes. He didn't look down. Didn't look at the darkness waiting below. Just focused on the next handhold, the next place to distribute his weight, the next breath that might be his last. Halfway across, the ice cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Nelson froze, every muscle locked, certain that any movement would send him plummeting. His mother's voice drifted up from below. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry you're alone. I'm not alone, Nelson whispered to the ice, to the darkness, to himself. Grandfather's here. We're going to save you. He started moving again. The bridge held. Barely. Grudgingly. But it held. Nelson reached the other side and collapsed against stone that was somehow colder than ice. When he could breathe again, he looked up and realized he'd emerged in the cathedral's upper gallery, a balcony of sorts, overlooking the main chamber. What he saw made his blood turn to slush. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow and ice. The floor was a mosaic of frozen suffering, faces pressed against transparent ice, mouths open in eternal screams. And in the center, on a throne built from bodies that might still be alive, sat a woman. She would have been beautiful once. Nelson could see that in the bones of her face, the curve of her jaw. But the curse had turned her into something else. Her skin was pale as death, her hair white as fresh snow. Her eyes were empty pits that somehow still saw everything. Seraphine. The Hollow Queen. Around her stood the Hollows, 28 figures that had once been human, now reduced to hunger-given form. They swayed like grass in wind, their movements synchronized, their empty eyes all focused on the altar before their queen. On that altar, chained with ice that glowed with sick light, was his mother. Sarah Valdez looked like a ghost of herself. Her skin was translucent, her breathing shallow. The marks on her arm had spread across her entire body now, glowing veins that pulsed in time with Seraphine's breathing. Life force, visible as pale light, drained from Sarah in thin streams, flowing through the air to pool around the Hollow Queen. Soon, Seraphine said, her voice echoing off ice and bone. Soon I'll be whole again. Soon I'll remember what it felt like to think clearly, to feel warmth, to be human. She stood from her throne, moving among her hollows like a general inspecting troops. 280 years trapped in this half-existence. 280 years of hunger and emptiness and screaming inside a mind that couldn't form thoughts. Do you know what that's like, child? She was talking to Sarah, who could barely lift her head. Your blood will free me. The old blood, pure and strong. My brother's legacy flowing through your veins. Seraphine knelt beside the altar, almost tender. I don't hate you. I'm grateful. You're giving me back everything he took away. My son, Sarah whispered, is probably dead in the wastes. Children don't survive out there. Seraphine straightened. But if he somehow found Alaric, if by some miracle my brother emerged from his tower. Her empty eyes gleamed. Then this will hurt him so much more. Watching another person die because of his failures. Watching his bloodline end because he was too weak to. The cathedral doors exploded inward. Ice and bone shattered like glass. Wind roared through the chamber, not natural wind, but something ancient and furious and absolutely done with hiding. Alaric stood in the ruined doorway, and he looked nothing like the gentle creature who'd held Nelson while he slept. This was the Vampire King in full power. Shadows poured off him like smoke. His eyes blazed blue-white, bright enough to hurt. The temperature in the chamber dropped 20 degrees in an instant, and frost spread from his feet in crystalline patterns that looked almost alive. Brother, Seraphine said, and smiled with a mouth that had forgotten how. After all this time, you finally came back. The hollows turned as one, their empty eyes fixing on Alaric. They moved into formation without being told, a wall of hunger between him and the altar. Seraphine. Alaric's voice carried the weight of centuries. Let her go. Or what? You'll destroy me. Seraphine laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. You couldn't even stay to help me. You created this curse and ran away. And now you want to play hero. She gestured at the hollows. These are your children too, brother. Every single one of them. Can you destroy them to save one woman? Can you finally make a choice and live with the consequences? From his hiding place in the gallery, Nelson saw his grandfather's hands clench into fists. Saw the shadows around him writhe like living things. Saw the terrible choice written across his ancient face. I didn't come here to destroy anyone, Alaric said quietly. I came to fix what I broke. You can't fix this. Seraphine screamed, and for a moment, Her voice was human again, young and terrified and in so much pain. You can't undo 280 years of suffering. You can't give me back my mind. No, Alaric agreed. But I can try. The hollows charged. And the Cathedral of Eternal Winter became a battlefield where a vampire king fought the consequences of his greatest mistake, while a small boy watched from above and his mother's life drained away drop by precious drop. Nelson clutched the pendant so hard it cut his palm, and waited for his opening. The hollows moved like a single organism, coordinated and merciless. Alaric met them with shadows that struck like physical blows, sending bodies flying into ice walls. But they kept coming, tireless and empty and impossibly strong. Stop. Alaric's voice cracked with command, with power, with the weight of being their creator. I am Alaric Valdis, and I still hold dominion over you. Some of them faltered, hesitated. The Maker's bond pulling at them like invisible chains. But Seraphine laughed, and her will crashed over them like a wave, and they surged forward again. You gave up that right when you abandoned us, she said. Alaric caught one hollow by the throat, and for a moment Nelson saw recognition flash in those empty eyes. A flicker of the person they'd been. Then it was gone, swallowed by hunger and emptiness. Seraphine, Alaric said, not fighting now, just holding the creature still. What have I done to you? You promised to save me. Her voice was barely human, raw with centuries of pain. I was dying, and you said you'd found a way. That you'd make sure we'd never be apart. Do you remember? Do you remember holding my hand while the fever burned and promising me everything would be all right? She moved closer, her hollows parting for her. You turned me into this. And when it went wrong, when I woke up empty and screaming inside a mind that couldn't form words, you looked at me with such horror, such disgust. Tears froze on her pale cheeks. Then you left. You locked yourself in your tower and pretended I didn't exist. 280 years, brother. 280 years I've been conscious inside this curse. Aware. Trapped. Screaming in silence. Alaric's grip on the hollow loosened. The creatures stumbled away, rejoining the circle. Sarah, I didn't know. I thought you were gone. That the person you'd been was dead. She smiled that broken smile. I wish I had been. Death would have been mercy. This? She gestured at herself, at the hollows. This is your legacy. This is what your cowardice created. She turned toward the altar where Sarah lay gasping, her life force now barely a trickle. She has your daughter's blood. Strong enough to break my curse. To give me back my mind fully. Seraphine's hand hovered over Sarah's face. I'm so close, brother. So close to being whole again. To thinking clearly. To remembering what warmth feels like. There has to be another way, Alaric said, but his voice was desperate now. Please, Sarah. Don't make me choose between. That's when the ice in the upper gallery cracked. Nelson had been leaning forward, trying to see better, trying to find that opening his grandfather promised. The ancient stone gave way with a sound like thunder, and suddenly he was falling, scrambling, sliding down debris into the main chamber. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. When he looked up, 28 pairs of empty eyes were staring at him. Nelson! Alaric moved toward him, but hollows blocked his path. Seraphine tilted her head, studying the boy with those pit-like eyes. The bloodline continues. She sounded almost pleased. How poetic. The hollows surrounded Nelson in seconds. Cold hands grabbed his arms, lifted him to his feet. He struggled, but they were impossibly strong, their grips like iron bands. Mom, he screamed, trying to see her through the wall of bodies. Baby? Sarah's voice was barely audible. Run. She can't even lift her head anymore, Seraphine observed. Minutes left, perhaps. But you. She moved closer to Nelson, her presence somehow colder than the hollows. You're young. Strong. Your blood is just as pure as hers, just differently diluted. I could use you instead. Or, her smile widened. I could use you both. Become more than whole. Become powerful. Let him go. Alaric's voice was ice and fury. Seraphine, let him go right now. Or what? You'll fight through all of us? Kill your own creations to save one child? She gestured, and the hollows dragged Nelson toward the altar. You'll have to choose, brother. Just like you always choose. Your descendant or your creation. Your new family or your old sister. Who do you abandon this time? I won't. You will. You always do. Seraphine's voice broke. You'll pick the easier path. The one that lets you hide from what you've done. You'll save the boy and leave me here to rot for another 200 years. Because that's what you do, Alaric. You run. Nelson watched his grandfather's face cycle through emotions too fast to track. Saw the terrible weight of 280 years of guilt pressing down on him. Saw him look at Sarah dying on the altar, at Nelson surrounded by hollows, at his sister who'd been suffering in conscious agony for centuries. Saw him realize there was no good choice. No right answer. No way to save everyone. Then Alaric did something Nelson didn't expect. He dropped to his knees. The Vampire King, ancient and powerful and terrible, knelt on the frozen cathedral floor like a man surrendering. You're right, he said quietly. I ran. I hid. I chose cowardice over responsibility, and you've all paid the price for my weakness. He looked up at Seraphine, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. The hollows wavered, uncertain. Seraphine stared at him, her empty eyes suddenly confused. What are you doing? I'm choosing, Alaric said. To finally do what I should have done 280 years ago. He spread his arms wide, defenseless. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I'm staying, and I'm fixing this, no matter what it costs me. You can't fix this. It's too late. I'm too broken. Then I'll take the breaking into myself. His voice was steady now, absolute. I created this curse. I can unmake it. There's a ritual. The undoing. I absorb all the corruption I created, all the madness, all the emptiness. It will probably destroy me, but you'll be free. All of you will be free. Seraphine's composure cracked. You're lying. You wouldn't. That ritual would kill you. Or worse. You'd become something even more monstrous than I already am? Alaric smiled sadly. Sarah, I stopped being afraid of what I'd become a long time ago. I'm only afraid of staying the same. He looked at Nelson then, and the boy saw everything in that gaze. Fear and love and determination and goodbye. Grandfather, Nelson started. Trust me, Alaric said. One last time. Trust me. And Nelson, surrounded by hollows in a cathedral built from suffering, watched his grandfather stand and prepare to destroy himself to save them all. The pendant in his hand grew warm. His opening was coming. Alaric's eyes blazed blue-white, brighter than Nelson had ever seen them. The temperature plummeted so fast that ice formed on ice, and every hollow in the chamber went rigid. Seraphine, stop. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of 3 centuries, of being the first vampire of his line, of blood calling to blood across an impossible gulf of time and suffering. The hollows froze mid-motion. Their empty eyes went wide, bodies locked in place as if invisible chains had wrapped around every limb. Even Seraphine staggered, her hand flying to her throat. I am Alaric Valdis, first of the Northern Line, he said, each word resonating like a struck bell. And I still hold dominion over every drop of blood I've cursed. Nelson felt the hollows' grips loosen, felt their fingers go slack against his arms. They were fighting it, or Seraphine was fighting it through them, but the Maker's bond was older, deeper, written into the very essence of what they were. Let him go. The hollows released Nelson. Stepped back. Their bodies moved against their will, puppets dancing on strings of blood and magic and ancient, absolute power. Nelson stumbled away from them, running to his mother's side. Mom, can you hear me? Sarah's eyes fluttered open. Baby, she whispered. You're alive. You're. Her gaze drifted past him to Alaric, and something like recognition flickered there. The stories. The old stories were real. How? Seraphine gasped, still fighting the compulsion that held her. How are you doing this? I'm the queen. They're mine. They obey me. They obey you because I made them, Alaric said, moving forward slowly. Because my blood runs through their veins, corrupted and twisted, but still mine. The Maker's bond doesn't break, Sarah. It can't break. That's why you've been conscious all this time, because some part of you is still connected to me. Still tied to the moment I transformed you. Understanding dawned in Seraphine's empty eyes, followed by something like hope, then crushing despair. Then make it stop, she begged. If you have that much power over us, make it stop. End this. End me. End all of us. We're not alive, Alaric. We're just hunger wearing human skin. Please. Please, brother. Show me mercy. There has to be another way, Nelson said, gripping his mother's cold hand. You can fix this. You fixed Marcus. You slowed his transformation. You can do something. You're the first. You're powerful. You can. The undoing, Alaric said quietly. The cathedral went still. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. No, Seraphine whispered. No. That's forbidden magic. No one's performed it in over 1,000 years. I know. Alaric moved to the center of the chamber, shadows pooling around his feet like liquid night. I've spent 127 years reading every text in my library, studying every forbidden ritual, preparing, perhaps, for a moment like this. Even if I didn't know I was preparing. It will kill you, Seraphine said. Or worse. It will turn you into something so dark, so consumed by corruption that. Then that's what happens. Alaric knelt on the frozen floor, began tracing symbols with his finger. Where he touched, the ice glowed red. The undoing works like this. The Creator absorbs all the corruption they've spread. Every drop of cursed blood, every fragment of broken transformation, every piece of madness and hunger. It all comes back to the source. You'll take 280 years of accumulated darkness into yourself, Seraphine said. 28 hollows worth of emptiness. My consciousness, my suffering, all of it. You'll be consumed. You'll become a monster worse than anything that's ever walked these mountains. Alaric didn't stop drawing. The symbols grew more complex, interlocking circles and ancient words that hurt to look at. Probably. Or I'll simply cease to exist. Either way, you'll be free. All of you. Human again. Whole again. Don't. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through everything. Don't. You'll die. Alaric looked at her, at Nelson, at Seraphine. His ancient face was calm, peaceful in a way Nelson had never seen. Then I die fixing what I broke, he said simply. That's how it should be. That's what taking responsibility means. No, Nelson shouted. We just found you. You're my grandfather. You can't just. Nelson. Alaric's voice was gentle. I've lived 300 years. Most of them badly. Let me do this one thing right. He pressed both palms flat against the glowing symbols. The light intensified, red shifting to white, and the air in the cathedral began to hum with power that felt older than mountains. The ritual requires consent, Alaric said, looking at Seraphine. From the first creation. From you, Sarah. I can force your body to obey me, but I can't force your will. You have to choose this. Tears froze on Seraphine's cheeks. You're really asking me? After everything? After you abandoned me for 280 years? Yes. Why? Because you deserve the choice I never gave you. Alaric's voice cracked. Because you're my sister, and I love you, and I'm so sorry. Seraphine stood there, trembling, caught between centuries of pain and the impossible offer of freedom. The hollows watched, still frozen by the Maker's bond, their empty eyes reflecting the ritual's growing light. If I say yes, Seraphine whispered, and you die, I'll have to live with that. With knowing I killed my own brother. You won't have killed me. I'm already dead. Have been for 300 years. Alaric smiled sadly. You'll just be letting me finally rest. Nelson watched his mother struggle to sit up, watched her reach toward Alaric with a hand that shook. There has to be another way, she said. Some other solution. Your family. We just found you. Please. But Alaric's eyes were already beginning to glow brighter, the ritual building power whether anyone was ready or not. Sarah, he said. Choose. And Seraphine, after 280 years of suffering, after centuries of being trapped in her own cursed existence, made the hardest choice of all. Save them, she whispered. Save us all, brother. And forgive me. Always, Alaric said. Then he spoke the final words of the undoing, and the cathedral of eternal winter filled with light that tasted like blood and redemption. The words Alaric spoke were older than kingdoms, older than the ice itself. They scraped against reality like claws on stone, and Nelson felt them in his bones, in his blood, in places he didn't have names for. The ritual circle blazed white-hot, and threads of darkness began to rise from the hollows. It started as wisps, thin streams of black smoke lifting from their skin like steam. Then it became torrents. Dark energy poured from all 28 of them simultaneously, spiraling through the air toward Alaric, at the circle's center. The first hollow to be touched by the ritual gasped. His empty eyes flickered, and for just a moment, Nelson saw a person looking back. I remember, the man whispered. I remember my name. Thomas. My name is Thomas. But there was no time to celebrate. The darkness was flowing faster now, and Alaric was screaming. His body arched backward, every muscle locked in agony. The corruption entered him like poison, like acid, like 280 years of madness given physical form. Black veins spread across his skin, crawling up his arms, his neck, his face. His eyes went from blue-white to completely black, then began to crack with red light like lava showing through broken stone. But the hollows were changing. Color returned to their skin, pink and brown and every shade of human. Their eyes cleared, pupils and irises were forming where emptiness had been. Memories flooded back, and with them came emotion. Confusion. Horror. Relief. Joy. Grief. My daughter, one woman sobbed, touching her face as if making sure it was real. I have a daughter. Marie. Her name is Marie. I was a blacksmith, another man said, staring at his hands. I made horseshoes. I had an apprentice. Gods, I can think again. Seraphine was the last to transform, the corruption leaving her more slowly, as if reluctant to release its queen. She fell to her knees as it drained away, and her scream wasn't pain, it was liberation. Brother, she gasped. Brother, I can think again. I can feel. I'm warm. She looked up and saw Alaric. He was dying. Worse than dying. The darkness was consuming him from the inside out, rewriting what he was into something that should never exist. His skin had gone black as void. His eyes were bleeding darkness. When he opened his mouth to scream again, the sound that emerged wasn't remotely human. No, Seraphine crawled toward him. No. Not like this. You can't leave me again. Alaric, hold on. Just hold on. But he was convulsing now, his body trying to contain power that was tearing him apart. The shadows around him had gone wild, lashing out like living things, and the temperature had dropped so low that Nelson's breath crystallized instantly. Sarah tried to stand to help, but she was too weak. The freed hollows, humans now, backed away in terror from what their creator was becoming. Nelson looked down at his hand. At the Valdez pendant, still clutched in his frozen fingers. It was glowing. Faintly, but definitely glowing, with light that was warm and golden, and nothing like the darkness consuming his grandfather. You're my grandfather, Nelson said, and started running. So you don't get to quit. Nelson, no. Seraphine reached for him, but he was already past her, already crossing the ritual circle's boundary, already close enough to feel the wrongness radiating from Alaric's transforming body. Grandfather. Nelson pressed the pendant against Alaric's chest, right where his heart would be if it still beat. Come back. You promised. You promised you'd never leave again. For a moment, nothing happened. The darkness kept spreading, kept consuming, kept turning something ancient and powerful into something that would make the hollows look like mercy. Then the pendant blazed. Golden light exploded from the small piece of silver, so bright Nelson had to close his eyes. He felt warmth flood through his arm, through his whole body, like every good memory he'd ever had was happening at once. His mother's lullabies. Summer sunshine. Fresh bread. Love. Safety. Home. The pendant's blessing activated Elena's magic, given 3 centuries ago to protect her daughter, now protecting her daughter's descendant and the man she'd loved despite everything. Blood called to blood across generations. The golden light wrapped around the darkness like Elena's arms must have once wrapped around Alaric, and Nelson heard a voice, not with his ears, but deeper, speak words that sounded like a promise being kept. Even death cannot break what love has bound. Alaric's scream changed pitch. The black veins began to recede, forced back by light that refused to let go. The red cracks in his eyes faded. The shadows calmed, settled, transformed from wild destruction into something that looked almost peaceful. His heart beat. Once. Twice. Not with life, Nelson understood that instinctively, but with purpose. With meaning. With the weight of a choice made and a promise kept and darkness held at bay by something stronger. Alaric's eyes opened. They were blue again, pale winter blue, but with gold threaded through them now like veins of light through ice. Nelson, he whispered, and his voice was his own again. You impossible, brave, foolish child. You're not allowed to die, Nelson said, and realized he was crying. I just got you back. Alaric pulled him close carefully, like he was made of glass, and Nelson felt his grandfather's chest moving with breaths that weren't quite breathing, with a heartbeat that wasn't quite alive, but was somehow more real than either. I'm not dying, Alaric said quietly, and there was wonder in his voice. I'm still here. The darkness is in me, but it's not me. It's. He looked at the pendant, still glowing against his chest. Elena. After all this time, she's still protecting our family. Seraphine touched her brother's face with shaking hands. Her eyes were brown now, warm and human, and streaming with tears that didn't freeze. You did it. You saved us. You actually saved us. Around them, 20 newly restored humans were helping each other stand, embracing, crying, touching their own faces in disbelief. Sarah had made it to her feet and was stumbling toward Nelson, color returning to her skin, the frost marks fading like bad dreams in morning light. And through the cathedral's broken doors, through cracks in the ceiling, through every wound in the architecture of suffering, light began to pour in. Real light. Warm light. Sunlight. Look, Thomas whispered, holding his hand up to catch the rays. The sun. We're in the sun and we're not burning. Seraphine turned her face toward the light, and for the first time in 280 years, she smiled with a mouth that remembered how. The curse, she breathed. Brother, the curse is broken. All of it. We're free. The cathedral of eternal winter wasn't eternal anymore. As sunlight touched the twisted architecture of ice and bone, the structure began to crack. Not violently, gently, like something that had been holding its breath for centuries finally exhaling. The bones that formed archways crumbled to dust. The ice that had grown through suffering melted into water that ran clear and clean. Alaric stood in the center of it all, still holding Nelson, and something fundamental had changed in him. The darkness he'd absorbed hadn't destroyed him, it had been contained, woven into his very essence like black threads through white fabric. His eyes held both shadow and light now, gold and blue and something deeper. He looked less like a monster and more like what he actually was, ancient, powerful, and finally at peace with what he'd become. You took it back, Seraphine said, standing beside him as the cathedral dissolved around them. She looked younger somehow, despite her actual age showing now in human eyes. You finally took responsibility. 280 years too late, Alaric replied quietly. But you did it. She squeezed his shoulder. That's what matters. Sarah reached them, and Alaric gently transferred Nelson into her arms. They held each other fiercely, mother and son reunited, both crying and laughing and alive. You're really my... Sarah looked at Alaric, searching his face for traces of the grandmother she'd never known. My great-great-great-grandfather. Something like that, Alaric said with a small smile. Though I gave up the right to claim family when I walked away from my daughter all those years ago. No, Sarah said firmly, one arm still around Nelson. You came back. You saved us. You saved all of us. She extended her free hand toward him. Family. Alaric stared at her offered hand like it was the most precious thing in the world. Then, carefully, he took it. The frost marks on Sarah's arm were fading, but still visible. Alaric noticed, and without asking permission, drew the small blade he carried. He cut his palm, the blood that welled up was red now, threaded with gold, and pressed it against her skin. The marks vanished completely. Color flooded back into her face. Strength returned to her limbs. Your blood, Sarah said, wonder in her voice. It's different now. Purified, Seraphine explained. The undoing didn't just transfer the curse, it transmuted it. Transformed the darkness into something that could coexist with light. She looked at her brother with something like awe. You're not just a vampire anymore. You're something new. Something that's never existed before. A rumble shook the ground. The cathedral was collapsing faster now, the last of its dark magic breaking apart. We need to go, Thomas said, helping other restored humans toward the exit. This whole place is coming down. They fled into the dawn, all of them, human and vampire together. The 28 who'd been hollows moved with cautious wonder, testing their new old humanity with every step. They remembered everything, their transformations, their time as empty vessels, the suffering they'd caused. But they were given a second chance, and none of them intended to waste it. Outside, the frozen wastes were transforming. Ice that had stood for centuries was melting. The constant storm had calmed to gentle snowfall. Ice wraiths were fading like bad dreams in morning light, and avalanche spirits were settling back into the mountains, their rage forgotten. And everywhere, was sunlight. Alaric stood at the edge of the ruins and turned his face toward the dawn. For the first time in 280 years, sunlight touched his skin and didn't burn. It warmed. It welcomed. It forgave. Tears slid down his face, freezing at first from old habit, then melting as his body remembered what warmth meant. The curse, he whispered. Sarah, the curse is really broken. All of it, she confirmed, standing beside him with her own face raised to the sun. We can walk in daylight. We can feel warmth. We can. Her voice broke. We can finally go home. Nelson tugged on Alaric's sleeve. Does this mean you don't have to hide anymore? Alaric knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's level. It means I get to choose. For the first time in 3 centuries, I get to actually choose what kind of existence I want to have. What do you choose? Alaric looked at Nelson, at Sarah, at Seraphine, at the 28 people he'd saved by finally facing what he'd created. Family, he said simply. I choose family. 6 months later, the fortress wasn't dark anymore. Lights blazed in every window. Smoke rose from chimneys in friendly columns. The gates stood open, welcoming, with guards posted not to keep people out but to help travelers find their way in. 47 humans and 28 reformed vampires had made the fortress their home. What had been a monument to isolation had become a thriving community, a place where people who'd been broken by the world could come to heal. The great library now served as a school. Seraphine taught there most days, using her centuries of knowledge to educate children who'd never had access to books or learning. She was patient, kind, and sometimes when she laughed at a student's question, Nelson could see the person she'd been before the curse, brilliant, curious, full of life. The throne room had been converted into a council chamber. Humans and vampires sat together at a circular table, all voices equal, making decisions about their shared future. House Valdis had been reborn with a new crest, an ice rose in full bloom, roots visible beneath the petals. A symbol of beauty growing from cold, of life persisting despite darkness. Sarah worked in the healing ward, using what Alaric had taught her about vampire blood's properties to treat illnesses that had been considered incurable. She'd found her calling, and watching her work, Nelson saw his mother truly happy for the first time in years. Marcus had made it to the fortress 3 weeks after the undoing, still holding onto his name, still fighting. Alaric had wept when he saw him, and used his purified blood to complete Marcus's healing. Now Marcus worked as the fortress's ambassador, traveling to nearby villages to share their story and invite others seeking refuge. Nelson found his grandfather in their usual spot, the tower window where Alaric had once counted snowflakes. But now he was watching the community below, children playing in the courtyard, vampires and humans working side by side to expand the gardens, Seraphine teaching a class in the afternoon sun. "Thanks for opening the door," Nelson said, leaning against the windowsill beside him. Alaric smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, and nothing like the broken creature who'd hidden for 127 years. "Thank you for being brave enough to knock." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over mountains that were no longer frozen, over a fortress that was no longer a prison, over a community that proved redemption was possible. The northern tower would never be dark again. It had become a beacon instead, a promise written in stone and starlight that curses could break, that monsters could change, that love was stronger than death, time, or even the darkest magic. And in the courtyard below, a small boy taught reformed vampires how to play tag while his mother laughed and his great-great-great-grandfather watched over them all, finally understanding what immortality was actually for. Not counting regrets. Building hope. One day, one choice, one open door at a time. If you love this story, please give it a like and share it with anyone who enjoys vampire romance, gothic fairy tales, or powerful family stories. Subscribe to our channel for more epic tales like this.